Have you ever looked at your practice and thought, this should feel better than it does? And it's not because you hate the work, certainly not because you are bad at what you do, and it's not because you've failed. In fact, the opposite is often true. You may be very good at the work. You may care deeply about your clients. You may have a strong reputation, a full calendar, steady referrals, and all the outward signs of success. But inside the practice, something feels off. The calendar feels too full. The work feels heavier than it should. The clients are not always the right fit. The fees do not seem to match the time, energy, and emotional load involved. And the systems feel a bit patched together. So the practice is working on paper, but it may not be working for you. That feeling is not something to ignore. It is information. And today we are going to talk about why your practice may feel off, even when you're doing good work, and how to begin seeing what might need to change.
Welcome to the Practice Playbook podcast, your go-to resource for legal professionals, mediators, and entrepreneurial experts building modern, profitable, and purpose-driven businesses. I'm your host, Susan Guthrie, attorney, mediator, and #1 best-selling author with over 35 years of experience. I'm a former chair of the ABA section of dispute resolution, and I've helped thousands of professionals build practices they love through my books, coaching, and training programs. Each week, I'll bring you real-world strategies, mindset shifts, and behind-the-scenes insights to help you grow with clarity, confidence, and impact. Let's dive in.
Welcome back, everyone, to the Practice Playbook podcast, where I talk about building a smarter, more sustainable, and more intentional professional practice. I'm Susan Guthrie, and today's episode is the beginning of something that I'm really excited to share with you over the next couple of weeks. As many of you know, I have been working on the second edition of the Business Plan Playbook. And this new edition has become way more than a traditional business planning book. It's really a foundation for a larger methodology I call intentional practice design. And the premise is simple, and it is that a thriving practice is not inherited, improvised, or assembled one urgent decision at a time. It is intentionally designed. But before I get into today's episode, I did want to give you all a quick update on last week's conversation with Cara Peterson and Richard DeBona, the co-founders of Describe, the legal search engine. So when we recorded that episode, Describe had just gone live as part of Anthropic's launch of Claude for Legal. And that was a big deal. But since then, they have continued to expand very quickly. Describe is now available in Perplexity and through OpenAI and ChatGPT, which means their trusted legal research and intelligence layer is showing up in more of the places legal professionals are already working. They also just announced the Describe Open Connector, which allows law firms and legal organizations to build their own AI-powered legal research tools and workflows on top of the Describe legal engine. That's a big development because it moves the conversation beyond which AI app should we use and towards a deeper question, which is what trusted legal intelligence are we building on? So congratulations to Cara, Richard, and the entire Describe team. If you missed that episode, go back and listen. It's a great conversation about legal AI, trusted research, and where legal technology is headed. And with that, let's turn back to today's topic because this is also a conversation about design. Not legal tech design this time, but practice design. Today, we're going to talk about why your practice may feel off even when you're doing good work. So, this is something that honestly I hear all the time from the lawyers, mediators, arbitrators, dispute resolution professionals, coaches, consultants, and other professionals who I work with in my private practice or in my incubator or accelerator programs. And they're responsible, for the most part, for building and leading their own practices. Almost all the people I work with are either solos or people that are in smaller practices, although I do work with large law firms and other dispute resolution organizations. But here today, I'm talking about those of us who are solos or small practice. They don't always say it the same way, but the feeling that they convey when they sit down with me, it's usually in one of the first few sessions, is some version of, I should be happier than I am. Or, I worked so hard to get here. Why does it feel so heavy? Or like something is missing? Or sometimes it sounds like, Susan, I love the work, but I do not love my practice. And that distinction matters. I know this because I lived this. This so perfectly describes the 20 plus years that I had a very successful family law litigation practice. I loved the work, but I did not love the practice. Right? I loved helping people. I did not love the way I did it or had to do it or the system in which I worked or the practice I had built around it. Because many professionals, and you may feel this way, they assume that if their practice feels off, the problem must be them. They think they need more discipline. They think they need better time management, that they need more confidence. They come to me because they think they need to push harder, market more, say yes more often, or finally just get their act together, right? Sometimes, of course, we all need better habits or better systems, but very often the deeper issue is not a personal failing. The deeper issue is practice design. You may still love the work. You may still be excellent at the work, and you may still care deeply about the people you serve. But the business, the structure, the systems, the pricing, the client flow, the calendar, and expectations around the work may no longer fit. So sometimes the problem is not the work. Sometimes the problem is the practice you built around the work. And often you did not intentionally build it at all. It formed, it accumulated, it grew out of necessity, opportunity, training, habit, urgency, and other people's expectations. And then one day you wake up, you look around and realize, this is my practice, but I'm not sure I would have built it this way if I knew then what I know now. So that is the central question I want you to sit with today as you listen to this podcast and you move beyond it. If you were building your practice today, knowing everything you know now, would you build it the same way? Now, not everything in that question has to be dramatic. You may not be talking about leaving the profession, shutting down your practice, changing everything, or starting over. That's what I felt like every time that question came up when I was in my litigation practice. I felt like it was a burn it down question, right? It was trash this all, go find some other thing I could do and start over again. And that's not what I'm talking about here today. So that is not a burn it down question. No flames involved, folks. It's a clarity question. So here are some of the questions around that clarity question. Would you serve the same clients? Would you offer the same services? Would you price the same way? Would you keep the same calendar structure? Would you accept the same referral patterns? Would you use the same intake process? Would you communicate with your clients in the same way? Would you build your systems around the same assumptions? Would you define success the same way? That's a big one. Would you define success the same way? And for some of you, the answer may be yes in many areas. And that's wonderful. That means there are parts of your practice that are working and deserve to be strengthened. But for many professionals, and honestly, if you're listening to this podcast or you're, Googling my website or reading my books or just feeling that discomfort with your practice, the honest answer to some of those questions is probably no. I would not build all of this the same way. And I want you to know and understand that that is not failure. That is not that something is wrong. That is just information. Uncomfortable information, perhaps, but information is where everything starts because information is what leads to awareness. And that's what's happening right now. We're becoming aware because I lived in that space of discomfort of knowing it wasn't right, but having no concept of why it wasn't right, or goodness knows what else I might be able to do because I didn't ask the right question and I didn't have the information. And so the awareness did not build. So you're in awareness right now. You now know more right now than when you started this podcast. You know more about your clients. You know more about your strengths. You know more about what drains you. You know more about the market. You know more about technology. You know more about what people are willing to pay for. You know more about what you can sustain. You know more about what you want your work and life to feel like. When you answered those clarity questions up above, those led to knowing more about all these areas of practice. So the practice that you have been building for the 5, 10, 15, or 20 years, that may not be the practice you need now. The practice you built 5 years ago, 10 years ago, may not be the one that you need now. Your life changes as well. The world is certainly changing around us. So that does not mean that it was wrong, but it means that it may be time to redesign the practice. One of the hardest things about this conversation is that many of the people who need it most are not obviously struggling. I was not. That was one of the hardest parts about it. My practice was going extraordinarily well. My divorce litigation practice was self-fulfilling, I guess I would call it, right? I didn't market. I didn't work hard on referrals. The clients came and new ones continued to fill the void when I finished a case. I had no difficulty in keeping my practice up and running. And by all ostensible meters, it was very successful. So it looked very successful from the outside. I had revenue, clients, lots of referrals. I had the recognition that most professionals want. I was doing the speaking. I had respect of my colleagues, I hope, and I was doing meaningful work. But behind the scenes, that practice got harder and harder to show up for every single day. And I talk to you, you're out there, especially you litigators. I cannot begin to tell you how many people, when I transitioned from being a litigator to a mediator, how many people came to me and said, "How did you do it? I can't do one more day of litigation." So I get it, right? It doesn't mean that you've done anything wrong. It may mean that you need to redesign the practice. This is why I think at this point, we need to separate external success from internal sustainability. Because a practice can have revenue and still lack margin. A practice can have clients and still lack the right clients. And for those of you out there who have the wrong clients, you know what I'm talking about. A practice can have visibility and still attract the wrong kind of work. A practice can have referrals and still feel unpredictable. A practice can have systems and still depend too much on your memory, your availability, and your constant attention. The fact that you can never leave it to run on its own. A practice can look impressive and still be unsustainable. This is where so many professionals get stuck because they feel guilty complaining about a practice that looks successful. They tell themselves, I did, I should be grateful. I should not complain. This is what I wanted. This is what success looks like. But gratitude and misalignment can exist at the same time. You can be grateful for the work and still recognize that the structure needs to change. And you can value your clients, but still admit that not every client is the right fit. Oh my goodness, do I remember the day that I realized I did not have to take every client who wanted to hire me. Major transition in my professional world. So you can be proud of what you build and still decide that the next version needs to be different. That is not ingratitude. That, my friends, is leadership. And you are the leader of your practice. One of the core ideas inside intentional practice design is that every practice is shaped by three kinds of patterns. Right? There's inherited patterns, reactive patterns, and then intentional choices. Inherited patterns are the assumptions, habits, business models, and definitions of success you absorbed from somewhere else or someone else, right? From your training, for many of us, from that first firm we worked for, from our mentors, from our professional culture and colleagues, from the court system, from your family, from prior roles that you held, and from the old way things were done, right? Especially in law and dispute resolution, we are the kings and queens of, but that's the way we've always done it. These are the things you may have accepted as normal before you ever asked whether they were right for you. For example, this is how lawyers bill. This is how mediators get referrals. This is what clients expect. This is how available I have to be. This is what serious professionals do. This is how success is measured. This is how much I can charge. This is the kind of work I'm supposed to take. Inherited patterns are not always bad. Some of them may be wise, they may be useful and grounded in real professional experience. But inherited patterns become a problem when they remain unexamined because what worked for your mentor may not work for you. What worked in your former firm may not work in your current practice. And what worked in one market may not work in another. What worked at one stage of your life may not work now. And what was once a smart survival strategy may not be the right design for the practice you want to lead today. Now, that second category, was inherited patterns. The second category is reactive patterns. And these are those decisions that are made in a moment, right? They made sense in that moment, but slowly they became the way your practice actually operates. For example, a client asks for an exception and you say yes. A referral source sends a wrong fit matter, but you take it because you don't want to jeopardize that referral relationship. You discount a fee once, and then it becomes your quiet pattern to do that. You create a workaround because you're too busy to fix the actual system. You respond outside your normal hours because it feels urgent. And then that exception becomes the expectation. You add one more service, one more package, one more accommodation, one more meeting, one more task. None of these choices may be wrong in isolation. In fact, reactive choices often begin as reasonable responses to real situations. The problem is in the accumulation. Over time, one urgent decision becomes a pattern, one accommodation becomes a policy, one workaround becomes a system, and one exception becomes the client experience and expectation. And eventually, the practice is being shaped by pressure instead of purpose. That is how professionals end up inside practices that never would have been designed on purpose. And finally, the most important category, the third one, is intentional choices. And these are the parts of your practice that you have designed deliberately, where you've thought about the clients you want to serve, services you want to offer, the fee structures you choose, the systems that you build, the boundaries you hold, the way people enter your process, the way you communicate with them, the way you follow up, the way you use technology, and the way your practice supports your life. Intentional does not mean perfect. It doesn't mean rigid. It doesn't mean you never adjust. Intentional simply means chosen. A practice built with intention gives you something to return to when opportunities, demands, and pressures show up. It helps you ask, does this thing that just showed up, does this belong? Does this support the practice I'm building? Does this fit my values, capacity, clients, finances, and my life? Does this move the practice forward? Or does it pull me back into default? That is the difference between a practice that happens to you and a practice you lead. So here are some common signs your practice is asking for redesign. How do you know when your practice is asking for redesign? Well, you keep feeling resentful even though you like your clients. You keep thinking, I cannot keep doing it this way. You're busy, but you're not building anything stronger. You're getting work, but it's not always the work you want. You're making enough to keep going, but not enough to feel secure. You keep solving the same problems over and over. Here's one that happens for a lot of people. You feel like your systems live mostly in your head. Yeah. How about this one? Everyone out there is going to raise their hand to this one, I betcha. You say yes too quickly and regret it later. That one's mine. I could say that one. You do not have enough time to think about the practice because the practice takes all of your time. Hear that one from professionals all the time. Your marketing brings in inquiries that don't match the work you want. Your referral relationships are important but inconsistent. Your fees feel disconnected from the actual value, the complexity, or the emotional load of the work you're doing. You feel like the practice is leading you instead of the other way around. Ugh. If any of those sound familiar, I do not want you to hear them as evidence that you have done something wrong. I want you to hear them as signals, as bells going off. A practice that feels off is trying to tell you where design is missing. That's a gift. Those questions that I just read off, those are a gift because the answers are going to help you see where design is missing. So the goal is not to judge yourself. The goal is to see clearly. So let's make this practical. You know, I want this to always be practical. Here is a simple exercise you can do after this episode. I want you to choose one part of your practice. So not the whole practice, too overwhelming. Pick one part. It might be your clients, the services you offer, your pricing, your schedule, your referrals, your marketing, intake, client communication, technology, follow up, boundaries, your client experience, or your internal systems. Plenty of things to choose from. Pick the one that I just listed off that rang a bell when I said it. Pick the area that feels heaviest to you right now, and then ask 3 questions. Ready? Question 1. Did I inherit this? Did I adopt this because it was how I was trained, how others did it, or how I thought professionals were supposed to operate? Question 1. Did I inherit this? I know you can see where I'm going here. Question 2. Did I react into this? Did this become a part of my practice because of urgency, exceptions, pressure, or a short term workaround? Did I react into this? Question 3. Did I intentionally design this? Does this reflect my current values, strengths, client services, finances, capacity, and life? That's it. You don't have to solve everything today. I just want you to notice and to become aware. Because once you know whether something was inherited, reactive, or intentional, then you can make a better decision about what comes next. And one little note here, you may find that things are a combination of inherited, reacted, and or intentional. Nothing wrong with that, but look at the balance of inherited, reactive, and intentional. And once you know that, again, you'll be able to make those better decisions about what comes next. Maybe it still belongs, but maybe it needs refinement. Maybe it needs to be released, or maybe it needs to be redesigned completely. But now you're no longer operating on autopilot. Now you are aware and you are leading. As always, I'm not going to leave you alone to do this, right? To help you do this more clearly, this week's free companion resource is a little different from the usual downloadable guide or worksheet. It is the practice design assessment, and it's actually live on my new website. I built a new website that goes along with the practice playbook series. I built it to support the new business plan playbook, second edition, that's coming out. So instead of, as in the past, where there was a QR code for you to go get the worksheets, now everything's going to live on this website. The website is intentionalpracticedesign.com. You see what I did there? Intentionalpracticedesign.com. I was lucky it was available. I got it. So you can go there and you're going to see something that says take the assessment. The assessment is a free interactive assessment. It takes about 7 minutes and it will look at 5 dimensions of your practice and help you to see where your practice may be inherited, reactive, or intentionally designed. And all 5 of those dimensions reach out to all of those questions that I was just listing off in the prior section, right? So those 5 dimensions are pricing, delivery, client experience, positioning, and AI governance. You know, I couldn't do it without AI governance. It's really important to get on top of that. You may not have any AI governance or know what I'm talking about. That may be somewhere that you're going to need to do a little work. But pricing looks at how clearly and sustainably your fees, value, and business models support the practice you want to lead. Delivery looks at how well your services, systems, workflows, and capacity support consistent, sustainable work. Client experience looks at what it feels like for clients to move through your practice from first contact to final follow up. Positioning looks at how clearly the market understands who you serve, what you do, and why your work matters. And AI governance looks at whether your use of AI and technology is intentional, ethical, secure, and aligned with the way you actually practice. Keep in mind, the assessment is not a test. You are not getting graded. It is a mirror. And the point is not to tell you that everything is broken. The point is to help you identify where one intentional redesign could create the greatest relief, clarity, or momentum. So when you hear me talk about this week's free resource, I don't want you to be looking for a PDF to download. This week, I want you to go to intentionalpracticedesign.com and take the free practice design assessment. When you complete it, you're going to receive your results by email, along with guidance on where your practice may be asking for redesign first and some resources to help you do this. That is the best place to begin. I always say on this show and all my other shows, anywhere I speak, actually, awareness is the beginning of everything. And I really hope that this episode has been the beginning of awareness around the difference between inherited reactive and intentional practice design, because I want you to know it changed my practice. And by changing my practice, it changed my life to where I am today, where I'm excited every day to get up and do what I do, although I have a hard time explaining what it is, what I do sometimes, right? But I want you all to have that. The central question that we're talking about here is also the central question that's behind the new second edition of the Business Plan Playbook. I had to rewrite the entire book because I don't think most professionals need a static business plan book, which is what the first edition was. I honestly think it's a really good book to teach you how to write a business plan, the components and the ways, especially using AI, that you can build out something that's very difficult for most professionals, and that is your business plan. But what I found for most professionals is they do that work, it gets filled out once, and then they forget it. They put it in the drawer. I want you to be able to lead the practice that you are actually living inside. So the second edition introduces this concept of intentional practice design, and it will guide readers through creating a living practice plan. So notice we've gone from a business plan to a living practice plan. And that's a practical, evolving framework for decisions about clients, services, pricing, systems, visibility, relationships, client experience, capacity, implementation, and importantly, leadership, because you are the leader of your practice. The book is going to launch September 29th. And over the next several episodes, I'm going to be sharing some of the ideas behind it here on the podcast. So you don't have to wait for the book to begin. You can start with the assessment. You start with the awareness. You start by asking what feels off. And then as we move along, you're going to start looking at one part of your practice, looking at whether it was inherited, reactive, or intentional. And that is going to start creating movement and momentum. I also want to point you to two companion pieces for this episode. First, there's this week's practice building newsletter, which went out on Tuesday. You can find it on LinkedIn. It's my LinkedIn practice building newsletter. It expands on this topic, and it's a companion article also called Why Your Practice Feels Off Even When You're Doing Good Work. And if you're not already subscribed, you can find the newsletter through my website and through the Practice Playbook ecosystem. And second, for my members of my Practice Accelerator, I'm adding a new resource this week, the first redesign priority worksheet that will build on the work that we've done in this episode. That worksheet's going to help my accelerator members move from the general feeling that something is off to a specific first redesign priority. Because the question is not, how do I fix everything? The better question is, what is the one redesign that would create the greatest relief, clarity, or momentum right now? And, for those that are listening that are not members, that's the kind of work that we're doing inside of my accelerator. We take big practice building ideas and turn them into practical next steps. So if you're in the accelerator, look for that worksheet. I'll be posting it in the community. Use it after listening to this episode. If you're not in the accelerator and want to find out more, go to susaneguthrie.com and click on the accelerator. Here's my final point before we close. A practice that feels off does not always mean you chose the wrong work. That's what I thought it meant. I meant I wasn't supposed to be a lawyer. I wasn't supposed to be in the law. What it may mean is that you've outgrown an inherited model. It may mean too many reactive decisions have accumulated. It may mean the practice still reflects a former version of you. It may mean your client's market, technology, capacity, life, or definition of success has changed. And it may mean that the work still matters, but the structure around the work needs to be redesigned intentionally. And that is very different from failure. It is growth, it is information, and it is leadership. The professionals who thrive in the next era of practice will not just be the ones who are excellent at their craft. They will be the ones who are willing to examine the practice around the craft and design it with intention. So, listeners, here is your question for the week. If you were building your practice today, knowing everything you know now, would you build it the same way? Sit with that and notice what comes up. And then choose one part of your practice and ask, did I inherit this? Did I react into this? Did I design this intentionally? Then go to intentionalpracticedesign.com and take the free design assessment. You do not have to rebuild everything. You do not have to start over. You do not have to decide that your practice is broken. But you do need to tell yourself the truth about what is working, what is not, what still belongs, and what deserves redesign. Because the practice you lead should not be something you simply ended up inside. It should be something you build by design, not by default. I'm Susan Guthrie, and this has been the Practice Playbook Podcast. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time.
Thanks so much for listening to the Practice Playbook Podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, I would love it if you'd take a moment to leave a review, follow the show, or share it with a colleague who's ready to build the practice of their dreams. If you want more support and tools like the ones you heard today, join the waitlist for the Practice Accelerator, my brand new subscription program packed with resources to help you grow smarter. You can find the link in the show notes or visit susaneguthrie.com to learn more. Until next time, stay focused, stay intentional, and remember, success starts with the right playbook.